really appreciate you guys
Wow.
making it in to see the gallery today. And I'm thrilled to share with you guys this, first of all, this incredible exhibition, which is the collection of Dennis Freedman, who you guys are going to meet and hear from today. Dennis and I, and Zessie, my partner who's here, we met Dennis about 20-something years ago. And really, what brought us together is why this show exists and why this gallery exists, which is really because of the passion we have for design and for storytelling and for preserving history and these sorts of things. This is what drives us, and I think it's hard to see with all these chairs set up here now, but I encourage you to come back and see the show when it's fully cleaned up again. But Dennis, who started collecting design 30-something years ago, bought work for the right reasons. Bought work from his heart. And so I think what we hoped to accomplish with this show was to, in a way, teach people it's okay to collect that way. It doesn't have to be about the value or about the money or the brand or the name. It can be about ideas. So that's the beauty of this collection and of how Dennis has built it. Adam, who we're thrilled to have you here as well. So Adam, I'm sorry, I always like
Charlap
Hyman, who Adam is an incredible interior designer and architect, and I've been hugely impressed by what you've done over the years, and I've been following your career for a long time, and Adam's worked with a lot of artists that we represent and we love, and other galleries in our field, so it's really nice to have you here as well in conversation with Dennis to hear your perspective, and I know you have a very deep passion in collecting as well, and so without further ado, I will leave it to you guys. Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think you can
Hi, everyone.
We just met because of this, because I called you.
Yeah.
I'd sort of been following your Instagram, a little bit your work, and I knew right away that not just kindred spirits, it was his knowledge that really impressed me. And that's a big thing.
Well, thank you for
a lot
inviting me.
of curiosity, of course, knowledge.
Well, I mean, kind of thinking about curiosity and creativity, I think something that would be so fun to start with is if you would maybe speak a little bit about how your jobs in creative direction and in creative industries have a relationship to your collecting. Because I think everybody is familiar with the kind of collector, market maker person that's, a very rich person that's buying, on spec, et cetera. But I think what's so cool and what was so fun when I first read about you is that you're a creative guy. You're somebody that's really looking and making and putting things together and forming these connections in your work. And I'm so interested in how that relates to the stuff that you've wound up with and the stuff that is all around the gallery right now, which is quite eclectic and quite, far-reaching and a lot of deep cuts. So I think that would be fun to hear about.
Well, and obviously not enough time, but I ended up, obviously my first job was eventually the creative director of W, and it was an extraordinary time, and I happened to work for, John Fairchild was kind of my mentor. Well, he gave me the opportunity, and interestingly enough, I had not much interest in fashion, and we never talked about fashion. But at the time, actually, I had a boyfriend in London, and I was traveling, and I was interested in many things, and he immediately picked up on that, like immediately. And that ties into all of this because we would talk about, people, places, movies, opera, you name it. And he was smart enough. I was an art director at a very bad magazine. I didn't have any experience. I was there. And then he said to me, I want you to be the features editor of W. This is when we were on 12th Street. W was still the tabloid. And I said, Mr. Fairchild, I don't write. I don't edit. I don't. And he said, didn't care. He just said, no, you have good, you have good ideas. And I literally had a desk and a telephone right next to him, and we all sat out. And they never once asked me what I was going to do, ever. And for the next 10 years, I was interested in photography. But my interest was William Eggleston and not particularly fashion photography, so my approach, because I had no one to tell me what I should do or shouldn't do, was to explore photography in a way that no other magazine was, and no one thought we'd survive, obviously, because we were not exactly showing fashion, but it was an exploration like this was. And the other thing that it did, it gave me the opportunity to travel all over the world. And I never could have done that. And James wrote a brilliant essay for this little book, and he pointed out, which I never thought of, obviously in the 19th century, 18th century, wealthy, aristocratic young men, some of them went on the Grand Tour. And that's where they were exposed to, obviously classical architecture. Well, I obviously wasn't wealthy or aristocratic, but my job exposed me to everything. And it also, apart from travel, which I initiated, I had entree to places. These were the result of meeting the Baron de Redé in the Hotel Lambert, and in this incredible room, there was one console against the wall that I just thought, what is, and I asked him, what was that? Who made that? Because it was the only thing that wasn't, 18th, 17th. And he said the name, but it was a Polish name, and I couldn't even repeat it. And I couldn't write it down, and I became, and this is a passion.
That's the one with there's like a unicorn.
See, he knows, this is the extraordinary thing, and that's why he's so good. He knows that piece. And he knows it because you know it. But I couldn't remember it. But I was obsessed because it was so extraordinary, and it took 3 or 4 years. And I was walking past a shop that a friend of mine actually owned in Paris. I looked in the window, and those two were crab and lobster bronze chairs. And I knew, it's him. And
the guy, the artist you had seen with the
Bronislaw Christoph.
Yeah.
Which I didn't even know the exact name till I walked in, and Robert said to me, do you know Baron de Redé? I said, Robert, it's been 4 years. I saw them last night, and I knew. And the interesting thing is, it turned out, of course, very few people know who he is. Very few people, only because he only made pieces for people who commissioned him. And those people, I got this sort of album that he made. This was made, this is a pair for the Dornano family. And the list of people, were only like 12, and they were literally, from Rothschild, Dornano, Cisneros, it was it. And the work is extraordinary.
And always in these very, very over-the-top, amazing kind of Mongiardino, Henry Samuel kind of interiors where you would not expect exactly to find this next to some kind of floral sofa that's heavily tufted, etc.
Yeah, but no, they're so. Anyway, I never would have been in that house with him had it not been for my job.
And actually, I love the idea of. I think my interest in collecting a lot of in my own way, in my own world, has been because I've fallen in love with interiors that
Yes,
belonged to
me too.
interesting people
Yeah, me
who
too.
put things together in cool ways.
Yeah.
And who were some of your kind of mentors or people that were inspiring to you? I mean,
Yeah.
Rede with that, but
Yeah.
who were some of the people
Well,
that really?
if there was one person who really also, he was someone I bought, that incredible console with the fingers coming out of it, was Yves Gastou in Paris. It was a deal, he passed away unfortunately, but Yves Gastou was really the most extraordinary. This would be a room he would have lived in. He had this range of, in fact, when you walk in, there's the insect, grasshopper, whatever he is, that's on the wall. I walked into his gallery and it was on the wall. And I was like, oh my God, what? And only he would have chosen that piece. And it's a table, it's a base of a table, and it's a light, but he had it on the wall.
Crazy.
And it was magical. And of course I bought it. And the other thing is, I don't think I've ever spent more than 5 minutes making a decision. At the most 5 minutes. It's immediate. If I can afford it.
And then a year arranging the logistics of the shipping, I guess.
Well, that was a nightmare because I have ADD and I was shipping things from
How
literally
did you
all
get
over
all
the
of
world.
this stuff here?
I don't know. I really look back and think, how the hell did I do it? Because I think it was.
And you had a job at the same time.
I had a lot of work
This takes a lot
to do.
of paperwork.
I had no help, and I was buying at auction all over the world. And customs, it's a miracle. My assistants would later but they didn't help me on that. But if you have to do it, you do it. That was really the issue. And Yves was a great, not only mentor, he had, the pieces, there's a resin table and 4 chairs in the back. Probably one of the best things I've ever bought, and it's by a woman called Martine Boileau, who was a French sculptor. Actually, this console is also a woman who was pretty much overlooked, where she stuck made casts of her thumb, stuck it in the resin. That table and 4 chairs was by Martine Boileau. I discovered it in his storage, and it was one of the most important pieces in one of the great exhibitions at the Musée Art Décoratif in 1970 of artists making objects. And it had very well-known artists, but her table and 4 chairs were actually, I found this out, I saw it and said, oh my God, what? And then I did hear, then when he told me the price, it was 5 minutes, it was 10 seconds, but I thought, oh my God, I can't afford that. And I was gonna mention it to someone who could afford it, and then I thought, no. I said, I'll pay for it over, I don't know, a year. And that was the way I bought a lot of things.
With a plan.
Always,
plan. Yeah.
Not always, but and any collector who really is passionate, money is not, it's not the issue if you are collecting something that yes, if you want big, that's a whole other issue. Collectors who have a lot of money and who are looking for names, whether it's art or fashion, or that really doesn't interest me at all, because I find it's not very interesting. I mean, I'm much more interested in seeing something and seeing a point of view that much of this is not work that is necessarily well known. I mean, they're mostly very rare, but Pucci de Rossi, that one sculptural light. I mean, he was an eccentric designer and made these crazy pieces, some of which weren't so great, but when I saw that, I mean, it's extraordinary.
How much does provenance fit into all of this for you? Like what you know, because when you're looking at auctions, it's very present, or sometimes it's kind of obscured, but it's for me, it's always been kind of a fun map, because you can, you know, look at an auction and find something, and then you can find that they bought it in another auction or something like that, and you can trace these provenances. But anyways, I mean, where does that fit into things
it's
for you?
interesting in that way, you know, okay, you can trace it, but I'm not at all care about provenance in terms of if something's that I fall in love with, because I'm not interested. I don't really care about provenance, and I definitely don't care about condition. That is, to me, one of the most ridiculous things, because if you're buying something that is 50 years old or 60 or 100, well, if it's in perfect condition, they never used it, and it was in storage. And you know, there's this whole thing about I don't think I've rarely asked for a condition report.
And you haven't seen everything before
I
you
haven't
bought.
seen almost anything, because almost everything I own was bought at auction in Europe. Almost everything. I mean, with the exception of, almost everything. So, and when I started buying, there was no internet. I mean, I had the catalogs and see the picture, and I knew, okay, that one, you know, is. But I didn't ask about the condition report, because if it was scratched, all the better. Or if it's like these almost just broke, I think. These were in Tony Duquette's house, and the minute I saw them,
And he didn't make them, right?
We don't think he made them. I think they were, God knows, but they're just, I knew
God willing.
These are extraordinary pieces. I mean, but. So yeah, I don't really care. It's nice to know. I'm more interested that that table and 4 chairs was in this exhibition in 1960 or 70. It was the last. Many people say it was the last great exhibition at the Musée Art Décoratif. It was the great curator, and it was a revolutionary show. It was artists who made objects. And the tradition continues here, and what's extraordinary, and the catalog to that show, I had to beg Yves Gastou to let me have it when I bought it. Evan and Zesty have it downstairs. And I can tell you right now, if you want to know if you walk into a house, and if you want to know if they have an interest, just look at their library. If there isn't one, you can forget about it. I mean, it's anybody who's a great, you know, there's this collection of butterflies, even more, birds' eggs, butterflies. The greatest one in the world was Rothschild, Walter Rothschild. He had a library that was every great, it's extraordinary. Well, the library is as important as the work, and that to me separates the sort of, and the word collector is a weird word. I don't even, whatever that means. A lot of people, it's tossed around in a really weird way, I think. Collector, what does that mean?
I have often felt that having a really amazing book about something, or with a lot of images of rooms that the piece is in, is almost as good, or it's as good as having it. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes you really want the thing, but it is an interesting kind of trade, actually.
Well, you know, I was collecting Studio Alchemia, and so at the time, even still rare. I was as excited about finding a book as I was about finding a work, because they were really hard to find in that traveling, you know, in Italy and France. So, you know, I built, but that's how I discovered some things I bought. I didn't know what I didn't know exactly where they came from, but I knew because of knowing about Alchemy and Super Studio. Many times the dealer did not know what they had, and I bought it, and sometimes in a few cases it took about 2 years to finally find that architectural model that's now in the museum in Houston. But by reading and studying, you can see something that I knew it was, I knew it was an important piece. And what's really interesting, there was a show of my first really collecting was of Italian radical design. And that really was about curating it. I mean, I had to get a warehouse because so I didn't even live with all of it, and there are a few here. But there was a panel that I bought, and the curator at Houston, who's incredibly knowledgeable, Cindy Strauss, who did this show, she said, well, we've researched your panel, and we actually talked to what's his name, the manufacturer, oh my God, famous. They said it's not authentic. Because I had said that panel I understood was in the showroom of Poltronova. And she said, well, I talked to the current owner, and I said, he's wrong. She said, what are you talking? I said, he's wrong. She said, how do you know? I said, I know. That is, I promise you, it is. And then I said, why don't you get in touch with, I think it was Sergio Camilli or whatever, really the original. She came back to me, she said, you know what, you're right. We found a picture, it's way in the back, and I knew it. I mean, it wasn't a question of the guy who was there now. You know by just, unfortunately it's not in this show, it's in Houston now, but that's the real excitement about collecting.
And I guess in design collecting, this kind of detective work is can be very fruitful, because a lot of things have not been cataloged in the way that fine art has, or a lot of the stories have not been written down in such a great way. And I love the idea of like a fragmented kind of conversation. And there was an essay in the book, James's essay, and he describes this funny dynamic that you had with one other person who was always putting things up for auction, and then you would be the only person to bid on it. And over years, you wound up sort of exchanging all of these things.
I never met him, ever. Yeah. And he had the rarest pieces of Super Studio, one of which was exhibited here. It was the Elemental Quaderna. It was but the cube. That was literally the first cube they ever made as a measuring tool for this. And it showed up at Phillips, I think.
Table in there.
Well, no, the actual cube.
Yeah.
It looks like, a silhouette. And James was there, and James made us. And he said, well, there's some guy in Monte Carlo who somehow, ended up collecting these pieces. And what was amazing, if there was a museum piece, that was it. I mean, it was like the Holy Grail. And now it is in a museum, but it was for auction in New York. Nobody bid on it. I think I paid $5,000. And I think it had a little crack in it, so I don't think I paid anything. And it really made me, well, it wasn't the first time, where are the curators? Where are these people who, to me, that period was by far the most extraordinary period of, it wasn't about design, it was so much bigger than that. And it was the only time that architects, designers made objects that were not about function, and they were about ideas. They were exquisite, I think, and museums were just not interested. And if anyone should have been interested, it was museums, because, so fortunately, I didn't have any competition. Almost none, actually.
I'm curious. I mean, I'm an interior designer, so
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask you about the dynamic that you have going with these kind of classicizing interiors.
Mm-hmm.
You have this apartment in New York that's 20s.
1926.
So, with like crotch mahogany door, very formal, very kind of
Well, it was
serious.
gutted. I rebuilt it that way, but yeah.
And then it's full of this radical Italian design, and it's such a great combination. And then also you have to kind of fill us in, because I don't remember the exact thing, but your house in Long Island is the garage of the
garage
partner of Schultz and Weaver.
Schultz and Weaver, who were the great hotel builders. They built the Waldorf Astoria. They built the Breakers. They were really, and Weaver was one of the partners. They were very wealthy because he also developed Park Avenue, but I ended up getting the garage of his estate that was lived in by an artist who was really quite talented, and it was completely in shambles, but it's this extraordinary space that's so it's very 50 feet long, and well, nothing could have been 10 foot by 10 foot doors, so it was immediate, and that is such a great space to have. I mean, for a long time, it had so many things. It was a storage room that I lived in, and I loved it that way. I mean, it really was. I mean, still a lot of things in there, but I've been very lucky in the spaces that I live in. But I prefer classical spaces. The white box thing, I don't find very interesting at all. In fact, I think galleries are just, I don't know. I mean, the best things I've seen have been in more classical spaces. It's the dialogue.
The tension.
Yeah, of course.
It kind of allows you to see very clearly what you're looking at if you put,
Well, it ties the work to a classicism. I mean, the thing that didn't start me. When I was 13, I lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is not a center of culture. But my mother was pretty unusual, and she went to the local bookstore, which she came home with the first edition of David Adler. And that book, I still have it. It's practically falling apart. And for those of you who know or don't know, David Adler was the great American classicist who studied in Europe and then built these extraordinary homes, and each one was based on another, Swedish or French, Norman, but the proportion, the details I looked at that book, even though I ended up collecting Italian radical design, it was that book that really excited me about, the power. I mean, I believe architecture has a power and design, to move people, to make there's a great documentary. I know I'm going all over the place, but that's sort of how I do it.
We're here for
story of my life. But no, there's a great documentary, if you haven't seen it, it's the most important one, of Louis Kahn, his son made, and Kahn was, a genius and probably the greatest, but he built the government buildings in Bangladesh. And in the film, his son is there, and the laborers are talking to him, and there's a moment where one of this worker tells his son how that building, how his work has transformed his life. And it's so, I mean, the work is extraordinary, and it does enrich your life if you see, or if you know, I don't, it's not a superficial thing.
When I came into the show the first time, I was really struck by the broad range of pieces that you've pulled together here. And I think there's one dynamic that really sums it up for me, which is that you have at this end the Geolenti Locus Solus light, and then on the other end you have these lamps that Mongiardino made that are faux painted. If you have seen them in the front, they have a paisley lampshades, and they look like stone, but they're faux painted. So what brings those two things together for you?
Well, I mean, of course, I was a huge fan of Mongiardino's work. I mean, I looked at everything I could. In fact, there was an auction of some of his personal thing. But he was a master. But he was also, what was interesting here, he was a great set designer. He was incredibly, what was interesting about him, it was he preferred the faux porphyry to the porphyry. The craftsmanship and all of that, you know, it's easy to use marble. It's not as easy to get someone who can create marble, and also, you know, it transforms those pieces. And what was interesting to me about Mongiardino was, you know, he was working at a time when a lot of the rest of the world was looking at minimalism and blah, 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 blah. But his clients didn't want that. They weren't interested in, and he was able, of course, his clients were the Agnellis and that was, I think, in the Niarchos apartment. They were interested in historical, but he transformed those things. And the mix of his, oh my God, his interiors were just masterful. And, you know, when I saw those, they were in a sale at Christie's, in a home sale, not a sale of, you know, those were the kind of less cheaper things. And when I saw it, I couldn't believe that they were there. And again, no one was interested except me. But that was 20 years ago. But they're two of my favorite. It's hard to put them up for sale.
I love that every piece in the show does seem to contain a whole world, or it suggests a whole world or something. You know, when that table, this chair, that lamp, those lamps, you know, they have so much going on, and they offer so much. They offer, you know, a whole language, a room, a life, a world. I mean, you really feel the power of these objects, and I think that's your gift in collecting. I mean, you see the pieces that can do that, that have the strength to do that. But I am wondering, how did you decide to part with this stuff?
Well, I had everything. I mean, I had a big warehouse. My house is like a warehouse. My apartment's not. And I've never sold anything for like 20 years, except to someone called Doc Ishiwanu, who became another really important person in my life. He's a huge art collector. And I decided that it's easier to do it not all at once. First of all, I would never do this if it weren't for R & Company. I can tell you that right now. This is the only place I would do a show, because this space, the transformation of the space, we were cooperating, you know, it was done together. The paint, my God, this paint is another story. But they understood, and to be honest, coming in here, I've never seen all these things together, ever. I mean, it was an opportunity to they were never together. They were there in a warehouse, and one was here, one was there. So this was a dream, and and it's easier to just put it all and just say, but it's funny, there's one thing that's not at all the rarest that I told them they can't sell. And it's this table. It is an early Super Studio Quaderna table, but it's my dining table in New York City. And when it came out of my apartment, nothing worked. This was so crucial. So it's the only thing that not for sale, and it wasn't at all the most important piece, but it really transforms that space. I mean, it's the dialogue again between the grid, and then, you know, there's the other thing is now, I mean, I've been for the last 8 years now really buying sculpture, mostly, some painting, some mostly art, but art of, I would just say, this generation. And it's similar dynamic because these are incredibly talented artists. I mean, it's really extraordinary, but they're at galleries like 47 Canal, Bridget Donahue. I mean, there's amazing, this is what really is kind of confounding to me about, well, maybe collectors. Right now in New York in the last 10 years, I've never seen so many incredibly talented artists. I'd say from 20 to 40, that age group. Mature, brilliant work. Josh Klein, you could go on, Annika Yee, all of these, and painters like Geneva Ellis. And these excites me because I see the same kind of talent and realization. And again, you have this, what's a paradox is New York City has, we all know, the biggest concentration of wealth in the world. And it seems that the one thing that a lot of people who have a lot of money want is art, because you can't just pay for it, but and it's, to me, yeah, of course, there are amazing painters who are with David Zwirner and are with, all in Chelsea. But that's the easy thing. I mean, it's so much more interesting to see. Funny enough, Josh Klein, 10 years ago, I saw a picture and I was like, oh my God, him. And then even, what's his name? He just has a show at the Whitney, and what's his name's having one at the Whitney after that. They're all still at galleries that are struggling. They're all on the, literally walking a line. And I just think, my God, I don't have that much money. So I'm on payment plans, and I've never bought anything more than a certain. And here are people who could not only, if they were really curious and really, they could have some of the greatest work. They could also support galleries that are, they're really they're trying to survive. And it only takes 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 collector people to support that. And it's really sad because Bridget Donahue is one of the great gallerists, and she told me, she came back from Basel, and talking to her peers, they're all trying to survive. And it is extraordinary. I mean, she has Martine Sims, one of the most, I bought a video work by Martine. I'm still paying it off. It's like a year, I think. But that, to me, this whole thing about art collecting, so much of it is meaningless.
I want to open it up for questions, but I think we can. I wanted to ask you one last thing, which is the standard kind of advice question, which I think is very interesting for everyone to hear from you about. What's your take? What's your advice to people that are interested in that have come here and have looked around at all of this and thought, I would like to do something even a little bit like this. What's your advice?
Well, I think the first thing is you either you have a passion, or you have it means something to you. I mean, it does. I mean, not everybody is affected by objects or design or architecture, but if you are, forget about buying anything first. Start reading, start looking at books. I mean, I was looking at Domus in college. That's how I ended up buying Italian Radical Design, because I had been looking at this work that I never thought I'd ever see, and then all of a sudden there was a piece in an auction. But if you're not curious enough to study, it's never going to be you're never going to really do anything, I think, that means anything. And I also think the idea of having an advisor, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I didn't, but I did in a weird way. But
that's now you're an advisor.
Well, yeah, but but the thing is, advisors can be very helpful, but you have to do the work. Yeah, it's easy to take you and to see Kerry James Marshall. Meanwhile, unless have been collecting him, you're going to get, if you get anything, you're going to get his worst work. You're never going to get a great work of his. And that's the irony too. I mean, if you have $1 billion, it doesn't mean you're going to get a great painting by a great artist. You're not going to get it, because there are plenty of people who have as much or more money, but they've invested their lives in, so you need to have a point of view of yourself, and that makes you, the real inspiration. Everyone probably knows the Vogels. I mean, Dorothy and Herbert Vogel. I mean, he was a postal worker and she was a librarian, and they built by far one of the greatest collections ever, over almost 2,000 pieces, and they never bought anything that they couldn't take home with them on the subway. It's true. And they paid on payment plans. And dealers ultimately, and artists were, they had $23,000 was, even then, that was not a lot of money buying. And it was their incredible eye, knowledge, everything. So, without that, there's not much point. And because that's part of the joy. Like, that's what I miss more than anything about not collecting as much is
the learning.
Oh God, the discovery,
So cool. Well, are there any questions, Ricky?
Yeah, Ricky.
Did you go to the Warhol sale?
You mean of his house? No.
The Warhol sale. But because you were talking about how you didn't care if things were broken and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, I think I know what you mean. He didn't either.
No, all those cookie jars are all glued together.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's a weird, I don't even know what.
What were you going to say about butterflies?
Well, there was this, the world's greatest collection. I was going to say collector, the word collector. If you really love butterflies, well. Well, yeah, it was, his name was, he was a wealthy Rothschild, Walter Rothschild, and he amassed the greatest collection of butterflies, bird eggs, some of it, and he had a library that was the size of the Morgan Library. Oh, he had thousands of butterflies, and the best. And that's what I mean. Everyone thinks collectors is art, painting. It can be butterflies, it can be baseball cards. I'd rather see a great butterfly collection than, it's really funny. I went to this, I don't know her name, doesn't matter. She was in Los Angeles. She clearly inherited a whole lot of money, and she had this house in Hollywood Hills, and there was some thing tied into, I don't know, frieze or something, and it was at her house, and there was all these curators, like everybody, and sure enough, the walls were filled with, all the things you expect. But someone walked into her bedroom, and in her closet were, I'm not exaggerating, 300, 400 Hermes bags, color-coded, everyone, the entire art world was in her closet. They were not a bit interested in, what was on the walls. They were fascinated by that. And I get it. She knew more about bags than she knew about art. And, it was a great collection. It should be in a museum. I mean, there were and so the bag collection was more interesting than
Anthropologically speaking.
Beautifully. I mean, those bags are beautiful, and they're made beautifully. I mean, I love craft. So I worked fashion work for a long time. And I collect, Ray Kalkuba to me is the poet. There's no one who transcended the idea of clothing like her. And I started to collect her clothes. And I think I have 3 of her great pieces. And they are extraordinary. And
I'm sorry, who was that?
oh, Ray Kawakubo, the Japanese designer of Comme des Garçons. But, her collections there might be 20 pieces. And, she deals with like body dysmorphia, and it's...
Do you display the pieces?
Well, I will. I didn't get yet around to making, but 2 of them were in the mat.
With textiles.
Oh, I love textiles. Well, you know what? This just shows you, this is crazy. On my way here, I had the Friday Times, and I saw this picture, and I was like, oh my God, what? It looks like a vagina. It's amazing. And of course, on the way down, I Googled her, and she lives in the Catskills. And this is John Fahey, who is a folk guitarist, making these paintings. 2 people who worked for David Zwirner opened a gallery. They're showing it. I will follow up for sure. But this is what makes it all. Who knows? Maybe, I don't know. What I saw of her work didn't measure up to this. It's a textile, and it's extraordinary. It looks like a Persian, but it's. But even on the way down, I looked at I went online. I saw her. And to be honest, one of the best things I've seen. And you probably know her. It's Lisa Perry has bought a house in East Hampton, restored it. It's an extraordinary house if you haven't been there. Whoa, it's where the Skulls lived. Anyway, Lisa, who's not a curator, she has exhibitions of women artists. There is a show right now of maybe 5 or 6. One of them has the name, a really crazy name, something Mays. She lives in Salt Lake City. I was literally amazed. She does ceramics, and they look like Chinese stoned. I bought those. I bought 2 of those. I think they were $2,000. But that's, it's amazing what you can find. And I think Lisa discovered her on Instagram. pretty sure. And this is someone who could conceivably, you might be interested. I mean, anyway, I'll find out about these two too. See where it goes.
Cool. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Sorry.
Thank you guys, that was
Yeah.
really fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
That's you.
So great.